Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. It was a little past midnight when dispatch called me about the ping. I was the only unit out near Fallon that night, running the graveyard shift on Route 50. Most nights it was just static. Long stretches of nothing but the hum of tires on asphalt and the glow of the dashboard clock creeping past the hours. Route 50 is called the loneliest road in America for a reason. Once you leave town, there's nothing but sagebrush, sand, and the occasional jackrabbit darting across your headlights. The call box that pinged was one of the old yellow ones installed decades ago, before everyone had cell phones. Most had been torn down or buried by now. A few still stood like skeletons along the shoulder, doors hanging off their hinges, their wires ripped out or chewed through by rodents. Dispatch said this one hadn't been connected to the system since 2013. But somehow, a signal had come through. One press. That was the distress code for someone injured or trapped. I didn't question it. Sometimes old electronics picked up false signals from nearby equipment, or maybe some kid with a ham radio was screwing around. Still, regulations said I had to check it out. So I turned off the main highway and took the service road that cut through the flats toward the mountains. The air was bone dry and still. The radio crackled softly in the background, just the dispatcher's voice fading in and out. The road narrowed into cracked pavement and eventually to gravel. Dust trailed behind me, hanging in the red glow of my tail lights. I passed the old mile markers, half buried and rusted, until I saw the faint silhouette of the call box about 100 yards off the shoulder. It looked like something out of another decade. The paint had faded to a dull beige, the metal casing eaten with rust. The door hung open at an angle, sand packed around the base up to the first hinge. A tumbleweed had lodged itself against the post. The cables that once ran underground had been cut and pulled out years ago, leaving just a frayed coil sticking from the ground. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching in the gravel. The air was cold and dry enough to sting my nose. The sky was clear, the stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. There wasn't a sound besides the faint ticking of my cooling engine. When I opened the panel, there was nothing inside. No wires, no power cell, no battery. The handset was still there, cracked and sun-bleached, the cord stiff like wire. I checked the inside with my flashlight. Just a hollow metal box full of dust and a dead moth or two. I stood there for a minute, thinking maybe I'd missed something. The sand shifted under my feet, dry and loose. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of dust and sage. I keyed my radio and reported the scene. Decommissioned call box, no sign of tampering, no vehicle tracks, no footprints except my own. I was about to head back when I heard it. A faint burst of static from my radio. It wasn't dispatch. It was low, irregular, like breathing filtered through layers of static. I froze, radio in hand. It wasn't wind noise. It had a rhythm to it. I waited, thinking maybe someone nearby was transmitting. Then, through the static, a voice came through, barely above a whisper. Rough, strained, almost drowned out by interference. Still waiting. It cut off immediately after. Just dead air. I stood there for a few seconds, not breathing. The voice hadn't come from dispatch's frequency. The tone was wrong, off-band. I scanned the frequencies, nothing but static. I called it in, but dispatch didn't hear anything unusual on their end. They said maybe I'd caught a bleed from another channel. Maybe someone using an old CB rig in the area. But out there was no one. The nearest ranch was 20 miles away. I didn't linger. I shut off the radio, climbed back into the truck and turned around. For a while I kept catching myself glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights behind me. But the road stayed empty. Just that endless black desert stretching on either side. When I reached the highway again, I pulled over, took a deep breath, and noted the time, 12:47 a.m. the next morning. Maintenance confirmed what I already knew. The call box had been physically disconnected for over a decade. The line had been removed entirely from the network. No power, no signal, no transmitter. There was no way it could have sent a ping. They said it must have been an error in dispatch's software, some ghost entry left in the system. I didn't argue, but I'd seen the alert myself, the timestamp, the coordinates. The system had recognized it as a valid distress signal. That night, I went back over the report before clocking out. Everything lined up except one detail, the exact time of the signal. Dispatch logged it as 12:03 a.m., but I hadn't arrived at the site until 12:35. I'd been 20 miles away when it supposedly triggered. No one else had been on that road, and no other units had passed through the area. I didn't think much of it again until the next evening, when I was sitting in the lot behind the substation finishing paperwork. Around the same time as before, dispatch came over the radio again. Another ping, same location. Same single press. I remember staring at the coordinates for a long time. The system doesn't repeat a decommissioned signal. Once it's marked inactive, it's gone. I double-checked with maintenance. They hadn't touched the box. It was still half buried in sand, still dead inside. I didn't go back that night. Instead, I sent a note to dispatch asking them to flag the site as potential interference. They agreed, though none of the techs could explain how interference could trigger a coded signal. The system required a physical connection, a pulse from a live circuit. Over the next week, the same thing happened 3 more times. Always the same time window, between 12 AUG and 12:10 a.m. Always the same single-press distress code. We finally sent a tech crew out to dismantle what was left of the box. They dug around the base and found the concrete pad cracked down the middle, sand and gravel packed inside. There were no wires left, just the hollow shell of the post. They hauled it away in pieces. After that, the ping stopped. A few months later, I was cleaning out old dispatch reports when I found an incident log from 1999, an old paper record, almost faded. Same coordinates. Single-press distress signal. Back then, a trooper had responded to a call from that box during a heat wave in July. According to the report, they'd found an abandoned car a few hundred feet away. Door open, keys still inside, footprints leading off into the desert. The driver was never located. They closed the case after a week. The box stayed active for another 10 years before the line was pulled. Every now and then, when I'm driving that stretch at night, I still look out at the spot where it used to stand. There's nothing left now, just a small rise of sand and a bent metal stake where the post once was. But every time my radio crackles in that same stretch of road, even just from interference or a passing signal, I catch myself turning down the volume. I never heard that breathing again, but I know exactly what it sounded like, and I know exactly what time it comes. I was on night patrol when the call came through. It was just after 2:30 a.m., the kind of hour when the city feels dead and every sound echoes. The air was cool, mist hanging low over the roads. I'd been driving near the Liberty Tunnel, finishing the last stretch of my route, when dispatch radioed in about a 911 call from inside the tunnel. A woman's voice screaming that someone was chasing her. Then silence. The call disconnected. The Liberty Tunnel at night has a strange emptiness to it. During the day it's packed with cars, the sound of engines bouncing off the tile walls. But at night, when the traffic dies and the ventilation hum is the only noise, it feels like driving through the inside of a lung. Claustrophobic, echoing, and endless. I flipped on the lights and siren, cutting across the empty street, and entered the northbound side first. The tunnel stretched out ahead of me. Twin lanes of pale concrete and yellow sodium lamps repeating into the distance. I expected to see taillights, maybe a stalled car or someone running along the wall. But there was nothing. No cars, no people. Just the hum of the fans overhead and the strobe of my emergency lights flashing against the tiled walls. I slowed to a crawl, scanning both sides. The radio crackled once, dispatch asking for an update. I said I was inside, no visual yet. My voice sounded too loud in the silence. Halfway through, something caught my headlights, a small object in the center of the left lane. I stopped the cruiser, got out, and walked over. It was a cell phone. Screen cracked down the middle, still warm from use. No case, no blood, no dirt. Just lying perfectly centered, as if it had been placed there. I picked it up and pressed the power button, but it was dead. I looked around, shone my flashlight across the pavement. No footprints, no scuff marks. The concrete was dry and clean, the kind of polished surface that would have shown any sign of a struggle. I walked both lanes, checking the emergency walkways, the drainage grates, even the side recesses where maintenance crews sometimes rest equipment. Nothing. I stood there for a long moment listening. The tunnel was so still that I could hear my own heartbeat. When I turned back, the cruiser's lights flashed red and blue across the phone in my hand, making the cracked screen gleam like a shattered mirror. I drove through the rest of the tunnel, out the south end, then turned around and went back through the northbound lane. Still nothing. Dispatch confirmed no traffic entered after the call came in. Cameras at both entrances had her walking in at 2:17 a.m., alone, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. She didn't appear panicked at first, just walking steadily down the center line, holding the phone to her ear. A few minutes later, she started glancing back over her shoulder, walking faster. Then the footage flickered. For 2 seconds, the lights dimmed. When they came back, she was gone. Just gone, no exit, no shadow, no blur. Between 2 frames of video. One moment she's there, the next she's not. The tunnel system has emergency doors leading to maintenance corridors, but every one of them was sealed and alarmed. None had been triggered. There are no other exits. We went through every inch of it. Police, firefighters, even PennDOT engineers. No signs of forced entry or tampering. Nothing to explain where she went. Over the next 3 days, we ran her phone records, checked hospitals, shelters, bus stations. Her name was Jamie Wilcox, 27 years old, living in South Side Flats. She worked late shifts at a diner and usually walked or biked home. She had no record, no known issues. Her last outgoing call was the 911 call. On the 3rd morning, around 6 a.m., a fisherman called in from the Monongahela River. He'd found a body floating near the 10th Street Bridge, tangled in some driftwood. When I got there, the mist was thick over the water. The rescue team was already pulling her in. I recognized her face from the footage immediately. Same sweatshirt, same jeans, no shoes. Her feet were bare, pale against the dark water. The medical examiner noted something strange right away. Her clothes were dry. Not damp, not stiff from drying overnight. Just clean and dry, like she'd never been in the river. Her body had no signs of injury, no water in the lungs, no bruises or abrasions. Cause of death undetermined. We went back to the tunnel with a fine-tooth search. The engineers checked for ventilation shafts or utility conduits that might connect to the river. The Liberty Tunnel runs deep, but there's no direct path leading to the water. Everything is sealed concrete, reinforced decades ago. Even the drains only lead to city runoff channels, nowhere near the river. I couldn't shake the image of that phone lying dead center of the lane. I went back there more than once during later shifts, parked with my lights off, just sitting in the quiet. Every sound in that place felt amplified. The low hum of the ventilation fans, the occasional crack of expansion joints in the walls, the way your own breathing seemed to echo back at you. There's something about being underground like that, miles of concrete around you, that messes with your sense of direction and time. It's easy to start thinking you're not alone, even when you are. Some of the guys at the station started avoiding tunnel calls after that. Said the cameras glitch all the time down there. But I'd watched the footage myself, frame by frame, dozens of times. It wasn't a glitch. I'd seen plenty of feed errors before, digital tearing, static, lag. But this was clean. She was there 1 second, gone the next. A few weeks later, I was called to escort a crew doing maintenance at the south end. They were inspecting the lighting and camera systems. One of the technicians asked if I'd been on duty the night of the incident. When I said yes, he told me something that stuck with me. He said every electrical system in that section logged a voltage dip at exactly 2:19 a.m., the same time the lights flickered on camera. Just a blink, less than half a second, but enough to cause a reset. When that happens, the sensors record a brief drop in temperature too. I asked how much. He said the tunnel air went from 72 degrees to 58 in less than a second, then back again. We never released that detail publicly. It wasn't relevant to the official report, and there was no evidence of foul play. The file was closed under undetermined circumstances, but I still think about that night. I think about how quiet it was inside the tunnel, how clean the floor was, how her phone sat there like it had been placed on purpose. I think about how her body ended up miles away, dry and barefoot, with no sign of how she got there. I've driven that route hundreds of times since. Every time I pass through, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone walking behind me in the headlights. The city moves on, cars filling the lanes again each morning, lights flickering the same way they always have. But late at night, when the tunnel goes empty and the hum of the fans drops to a low rumble, it still feels like something's missing in there, like a piece of that place is hollow now, holding on to the space where she vanished. And sometimes when I pass the midpoint, my radio cuts out for just a second. Same place, same static, same time of night. Every time I look down at the dash clock, it's always 2:19. The report came in just after dark. A group of hikers had seen a light moving inside the old house off Canyon Road, the one that had been condemned for years. Most people avoided that place. It sat half buried in snowdrifts through winter, leaning slightly to one side like it had been giving up for decades. But when I heard about the light, I didn't think it was anything supernatural. Probably a squatter trying to stay warm, or some kids looking for a thrill. Still, I couldn't ignore it. The house was close enough to the trail that if someone was living there, they could easily start a fire and cause real trouble. By the time I got my gear together, snow was falling heavy enough to muffle sound. The drive up Canyon Road was slow, my headlights bouncing off the thick white curtain in front of me. Trees on either side bent under the weight of it, the road winding higher until the town lights disappeared behind me. The house sat just off a narrow pullout, barely visible through the trees. Even from the truck it looked wrong. Windows black, roof sagging, chimney crumbling at the top. The no trespassing sign on the front gate had been half torn away by the wind. I left the truck idling and stepped out into the cold. My boots sank deep, crunching through the crusted snow. The wind cut across the canyon, sharp enough to sting my face. I kept my flashlight low, sweeping it over the porch. The boards were warped and slick with ice. A few sets of footprints led up to the door, none leading back out. They were fresh enough that snow hadn't filled them in completely. That meant someone had gone in sometime tonight. The door was partly open. I nudged it with my boot and it groaned inward, the hinges shrieking in the cold. The smell hit me first, a thick, sour stench of rot and mold and something faintly chemical, like burned plastic. My light caught the edge of a broken table, and an old chair tipped over in the corner. A pile of blankets was heaped near what used to be the fireplace. Melted candle wax was pooled over an old plate. Empty food cans were stacked along the wall, some with rusted lids, some newer. Whoever was staying here had been here a while. The floor creaked under my weight as I moved farther inside. Wallpaper hung down in strips, the pattern almost completely faded. I could hear the storm outside pressing against the walls, the wind slipping through gaps in the window frames. The air was damp and cold enough that my breath hung in front of me. I called out once, just a sharp hello, but there was no answer. Only the sound of dripping water somewhere deeper in the house. In the kitchen, I found more signs of someone living rough. An old camping stove, a plastic jug of melted snow water, a sleeping bag rolled tight. Someone had been squatting here long enough to make it their space. The smell was strongest near the stairwell, like something had died or been left to rot. I didn't want to go upstairs, but I needed to make sure the place was empty before I left. The stairs were steep and narrow, every step flexing beneath my boots. At the top, my flashlight beam caught a small hallway, doors open on both sides. The first room looked like an old bedroom, the floor covered in garbage. Wrappers, old clothes, more candles burned down to puddles. The second door led into a larger room with a single mattress on the floor, its surface stained dark in patches. The walls were covered in Polaroids. I stopped for a long time just looking at them, hundreds of them pinned in uneven rows. Each photo showed something different, but all from the same kind of distance, as if taken from across a street, through a window, or between fence boards. People walking dogs, kids getting off school buses, a man mowing his lawn, a woman carrying groceries. Each picture had a date written under it in black marker. Most were from months ago. Some went back years. All of them were from town. I recognized the street. It was Maple Avenue, my street. I stepped closer and scanned the photos, feeling my stomach tighten. Every house looked familiar. Every angle was one I passed almost daily. Then I found one that made my chest go cold. It was my own house, shot from the sidewalk at night. The curtains were drawn, but my truck was in the driveway. The date written under it was tomorrow. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Tomorrow. Someone had been taking pictures of people's homes, of my home, and marking the dates as if they were keeping track of something. The last one meant whoever had done this wasn't finished yet. I turned slowly, sweeping my light around the room again. There was no one there, but the smell was stronger, heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever took those photos could still be nearby. Maybe even watching me right now. I backed out of the room, careful not to touch the walls. My hands were shaking. The stairs creaked louder on the way down, and I felt the wind shift through the house as I reached the bottom. The front door had swung wider open, snow blowing in across the floor. Outside, my footprints were nearly gone, half filled by the drifting snow. But next to them, leading away from the porch and back toward the road, were another set. Fresh, sharp-edged prints, much smaller than mine. I followed them to the tree line. They crossed through the snow toward the direction of town, a straight line through the drifts. The storm had picked up, wind pushing hard enough to sting my face, and soon the prints started to fade. I followed them for maybe 50 yards before they disappeared completely under fresh snow. Whoever it was, they had left minutes before I got there. I went back to my truck and sat inside for a while, engine running, heater blasting, but I couldn't shake the cold. I drove back down the canyon slow, glancing in the mirrors more than I should have. The beam of my taillights cutting through the snow. When I got home, it was close to midnight. The street was empty, the houses dark. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a long time, staring at the curtains where the photo had been taken from. I got out, walked around the yard, checked the gate, the hedges. The garage door, nothing looked disturbed. The snow in my yard was untouched except for my own tracks. Inside, the house was still. Just the hum of the furnace and the occasional creak of wood as it settled in the cold. I locked every window, checked each door twice. Then I sat in the dark living room, lights off, waiting. Outside, the snow kept falling. I thought about those photos, the careful way they'd been arranged, the one with tomorrow's date, and the faint smell of candles and rot clinging to my jacket. I didn't sleep that night. Every time a car passed or a branch scraped the siding, I expected to see a flash of movement through the curtains. Morning came gray and silent. When I stepped outside, fresh footprints led across the street, stopping right in front of my house. They faced the window where I'd sat awake all night. Then they turned and disappeared back down the road toward town. We found the car just after dusk, nose down in a muddy ditch off County Road 14, maybe 20 miles outside of town. The headlights were still glowing against the wet wheat stalks, and the engine was cold. Rain had passed earlier that evening, leaving everything slick and heavy with that smell of soaked dirt. The driver's side door hung open, dome light dim, a faint chime sounding when the wind rocked the frame. At first, we thought it might have been a drunk driver who'd run off the road. Happens plenty around here when the county fair's in town. But there was no one inside. No damage that suggested a crash. The car wasn't even deep in the ditch, just tipped forward enough to look abandoned. A thin stream of muddy water trickled under the front bumper, running down toward the drainage culvert. There were footprints, one clear line of them, pressed deep into the wet soil leading away from the car and straight into the wheat field. I remember how defined they were, every tread of the boot visible. You could see where water had pooled inside some of them. Whoever it was had left in a hurry, not stumbling, not wandering, just walking with purpose. We followed the tracks with flashlights, sweeping the beams over the golden stalks bent by the rain. The field stretched wide and flat for what felt like forever, all the way to the dark shape of a tree line in the distance. The prints went straight for about 50 yards, then just stopped, mid-step. No sign of slipping or doubling back, no drag marks, no other set crossing over. Just a final footprint half sunk in the mud and then nothing. It didn't make sense. If he'd collapsed, we'd have seen disturbed stalks. If someone had picked him up, there would have been tire marks on the road or fresh tracks somewhere in the mud. But the road was untouched, and the rain had stopped long before we arrived. It was like he'd vanished mid-stride, right there in the open. We searched until the local sheriff arrived, then stayed with the others while they brought in dogs from the next county over. The dogs caught the scent near the ditch, followed it into the field, and lost it right where the prints ended. The handlers cursed under their breath and circled again and again. But the trail just stopped cold. We fanned out with lanterns and flashlights, calling the man's name even though none of us knew it yet. The wheat rustled softly in the wind, and in the distance we could hear the hum of the highway. It was quiet otherwise, that heavy, lonely kind of quiet that comes after rain in open country. Around midnight, one of the deputies radioed that they'd found something half a mile away, near a stretch of barbed wire fencing that bordered the far end of the property. I remember the look on the sheriff's face when we got there. Puzzled, not scared, but just blank with disbelief. Hanging from the top strand of the fence, like someone had carefully draped it there, was a leather wallet. No mud on it, not soaked, just damp from the air. Inside were a few bills, an ID, some cards. The name was Craig N., 32, from a town about 2 hours south. There were no footprints near the fence. The ground there was still soft enough to take a print, but there wasn't a single one. It was as if the wallet had been placed there from above or dropped straight down. They combed the area for 2 more days. Helicopters, volunteers, dogs again, nothing. No sign of the man. Not a scrap of clothing, no phone, no trace. The car was towed and impounded, but it didn't tell us much either. Keys still in the ignition, tank half full, radio off. The report said missing person. That was the official word. But everyone who'd been there that night, the deputies, the volunteers, even the farmer whose land it was, they all agreed something about it didn't feel right. Not supernatural, not ghostly, just wrong in a way that doesn't fit any explanation. Like the kind of wrong you feel in your gut when the world doesn't line up the way it should. The case stayed open. I moved on, but I never forgot that field. Every time I drove past it, especially in late summer when the wheat stood tall, I'd glance toward the spot where those footprints had ended. You could almost still see it in your head, that last print half filled with rainwater leading nowhere. Years passed. Then, one autumn about 7 years later, I got a call from the sheriff's office asking if I remembered that night. A farmer had reported seeing someone standing out in the same field, just beyond the reach of his truck headlights. He said the figure didn't move, didn't wave or call out, just stood there facing the road. By the time he drove closer, it was gone. He thought it might be a trespasser, so deputies checked it out. Nothing, no tracks, no fresh mud disturbed. A few weeks later, another farmer called it in. Same story. Then another. Always during harvest season. Always someone working late, seeing a lone figure out there in the dark. Some said it looked like a man wearing a jacket. Others couldn't tell. Just a shape still and silent among the stalks. Always facing the road. I went back there once about 3 years ago. Just to see it again, to maybe put it out of my head. The wheat was short then, freshly cut, and the field looked ordinary in daylight. The ditch had been filled a bit, and there was new fencing along the edge. But standing there, I could still trace where the footprints had gone. Straight as a line, ending in nothing. I remember walking out to where they would have stopped, looking back toward the road. It was quiet except for the wind and the ticking of insects. The land rolled gently, and from there you could see the exact spot where the car had been found. For a long time I just stood there, trying to picture what had happened. A man walking into a field. Steady steps, no hesitation, no sign of panic, and then gone. Before I left, I followed the fence line where they'd found his wallet. The barbed wire was rusted now, but one post still leaned a bit, as if it had been bent once years ago. A scrap of weathered leather was caught on one barb, old and cracked from sun exposure, maybe from a glove, maybe from that same wallet. That night I stayed at a small motel outside of town. When I turned off the lights, I couldn't stop picturing that field under the moonlight, the way the wheat moved in waves. I thought about how, every year, someone says they see a figure standing there, and how the reports always describe the same thing. A man facing the road, never turning, never moving closer. Maybe it's just how headlights play tricks on tired eyes. Maybe it's farmers spooking themselves in the dark. Or maybe it's something simpler, something ordinary we'll never piece together. A man who walked into a field for reasons unknown and never came back out, leaving only a mystery behind. But every time I drive that stretch of road now, especially at night, I find myself slowing down without meaning to. And every time the beams of my headlights sweep across that wheat, I half expect to see someone standing there, motionless just beyond the light, facing me, as if still waiting for something none of us ever understood. It was late fall, cold enough that the frost stuck around even past noon. I was on patrol in Callaway County, Missouri, running the same stretch of Route HH I'd been covering for nearly a decade. The dispatcher's voice came through around 6:40 p.m., right as the sun was dropping behind the trees. Unit 214, report of an abandoned truck off Route HH near mile marker 12, engine still running. I acknowledged, turned off onto the shoulder and headed that way. By the time I got there, the sky was bruised purple and the temperature had dropped fast. The truck was parked about 20 yards off the road, half hidden by tall grass. Headlights still on, shining straight toward an old tobacco barn maybe 100 feet out in the field. The kind of place that hadn't seen use in 20 years, weathered gray boards leaning inward like it was sighing. The truck's driver's door was wide open. I left my cruiser idling with the flashers on and stepped out. The air smelled like diesel and wet dirt. Crickets were still chirping, but quiet, like they knew something wasn't right. I shined my light into the cab. A pair of mud-caked work boots sat neatly on the floorboard, socks tucked inside. A thermos was wedged between the seats, lid still screwed on, and there was a half-eaten sandwich on a napkin. The radio was playing soft, tinny music, something from the 60s. The truck's dash clock read 6:58. I checked the plates. The truck belonged to a man named John Mercer, 43, from Fulton. Local guy, worked construction according to the system. No warrants, nothing unusual. There were fresh tracks leading away from the truck, big prints same size as the boots inside. But they went straight through the tall grass toward the barn. I followed them, watching my breath fog in the beam of my flashlight. The field was uneven, the kind that swallows your boots halfway if you're not careful. Frosted grass crunched under me. The barn loomed darker as I got closer, the boards warped and broken in places. A thin shaft of light came through one of the cracks, maybe from the truck's headlights reflecting in. The smell hit before I even stepped inside. Moldy hay, mouse droppings, and something faintly metallic like rust or old blood. I called out the man's name but didn't get an answer, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the wood. I panned the light across the floor. The dirt was uneven, scattered with dry hay. Something moved in the corner and I almost drew my weapon, but it was just a rat skittering out of sight. In the back, near where the floorboards had half collapsed, there was a pile of bones. At first I thought they were from deer or something bigger, but when I crouched and looked closer, they were smaller. Raccoons maybe, or cats. Piles of them, clean, pale, dry. Behind that pile I saw fabric, a heavy work coat, gray with darker stains around the cuffs. I recognized it immediately from the driver's license photo on file. It was Mercer's, but it wasn't lying crumpled like someone had dropped it. It was folded, neat and flat, like it had been placed there deliberately. On top of it sat his keys. I picked them up with a pen, bagged them, and stepped back. No blood. No signs of struggle. No drag marks leading out. Nothing. Just silence and the hum of the truck still running outside. I searched the area around the barn for another hour. The frost was thick by then, and every time I exhaled it came out in heavy white clouds. No fresh prints except Mercer's leading in. None leading out. Dispatch sent another unit, and we combed the property until after midnight. The landowner said nobody had used that barn since the early 2000s, not since the tobacco bans had hit. They never found Mercer. Over the next few days, we interviewed his co-workers, his family, everyone. They said he'd been normal. No debts, no enemies. No reason to walk off in the middle of nowhere barefoot. The food in his thermos was still warm when we found it. So whatever happened, it had happened not even an hour before I got there. The case sat open on my desk for weeks, nothing to go on. 2 weeks later, another call came in. Same road, same time of evening. Another abandoned truck, different make and color, but the same setup. Parked off the shoulder, driver's door open, engine running, lights aimed toward that same barn. I drove there faster than I should have, my gut tight the whole way. When I pulled up, the air was colder, the grass silver under the moonlight. This truck belonged to a man named David Collier, a delivery driver from Jefferson City. He'd clocked out from his route around 5:30. He was supposed to be on his way home. Inside the cab were a thermos and a sandwich, just like before. The thermos was the same brand as Mercer's, Stanley, green metal, dented around the rim. The same oldies station was playing too, same low volume. I stood there a while just listening to the hum of the engine, and that faint music drifting from the speakers. The headlights were pointed at the same barn, just like before, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside again. Another set of tracks went through the grass. Same size boots, same direction, same spacing. Backup arrived, and we followed the prints again. They stopped at the entrance just like Mercer's had. Inside the barn, the air was heavier, colder. The old pile of bones hadn't moved, but now there was another coat. A blue one this time, also folded neatly beside the first. On top of it, Collier's keys, no blood, no body. After that, the sheriff had the barn boarded up. We ran soil samples, checked for signs of gas leaks, chemicals, anything that could explain why two grown men had parked. Stripped their coats and vanished. Nothing, no toxins, no prints beyond their own. Even the tire tracks from both trucks ended almost exactly in the same spot. For months after, no one went near that stretch of HH. The barn rotted even more. Half the roof caved in after a spring storm. But the part where the coats were found never seemed to collapse. Every so often I'd pass that area on patrol, slow down a little, and look toward the field. You could still see the outline of the barn through the trees, leaning in gray against the sky. In the official reports, both cases are still listed as missing persons. No suspects, no evidence of foul play. But I know what I saw. I know how those coats were folded, how the keys were placed like someone wanted them found that way. When I drive that road at night now, I don't look toward the barn anymore. I keep my eyes on the yellow lines and my hands tight on the wheel. Because some things don't make sense, not in the way we want them to. Some places just hold on to people, quiet and patient, until no one remembers they were ever there at all. I was a deputy back then, assigned mostly to welfare checks and low-level calls that didn't make the news. It was mid-July, one of those thick, humid evenings where the air clings to you no matter how still you stand. The call came in from the desk clerk at the Lakewood Motor Lodge, a rundown place off Highway 19, that mostly drew long-haul truckers and folks passing through who couldn't afford better. The clerk said one of their guests hadn't come out of his room in 3 days. Room 9, no response to knocks, no sounds. The blinds never moved. When I pulled into the parking lot, the neon sign was flickering weakly, buzzing every few seconds. The pavement was cracked and glistening with oil spots. The building itself looked tired. Paint peeling, rust on the railings, a Coke machine that hummed louder than it should have. The clerk, a thin guy with deep eye bags and a cigarette burned almost to the filter, met me outside the office. He didn't say much, just pointed toward the far end of the row. Room 9 was near the corner, half shaded by an overgrown hedge. The air felt heavy, still. I knocked once, waited, knocked again, louder. No answer. The blinds were half closed, and through the gap I could see the glow of a television screen flashing static light. I tried the knob, locked. The clerk fished out a master key from his pocket and handed it to me without a word. When the door opened, the smell hit instantly, thick and sour, like spoiled food mixed with something metallic and sweet. I'd smelled death before, and it was close to that, but not quite right. It had a greasy heaviness to it, clinging to the back of my throat. The man was sitting upright in the chair facing the TV, completely naked. His skin had gone pale gray, eyes open, jaw slightly slack. His head was tilted just enough that it looked like he'd been staring through the static, not at it. The room was dim except for the strobing light from the television, and it made everything look distorted, like shadows were shifting when they weren't. I stepped in, keeping my breathing shallow. The air was thick, warm, and foul. The floor was littered with trash, fast food wrappers, empty beer cans, a styrofoam container with something fuzzy growing inside. The bed was unmade, sheets balled near the foot, stained dark yellow, but the wall behind the man stopped me cold. It was covered in handprints. Dozens of them, maybe more, some overlapping, some smudged, all greasy and uneven. You could see where fingers had dragged downward in streaks. They weren't bloody, just the same dark, oily residue that builds up from skin and sweat. It looked like someone had been pressing their hands all over the wall, frantic, desperate, like they couldn't stop. The chair had scrape marks on the floor, like he'd been moving it closer and closer to the wall. There were smears across the wallpaper where he must have leaned against it. His fingernails were caked with the same grime. I checked for signs of struggle. Nothing overturned, no bruising that stood out right away. His expression wasn't one of pain, just vacant. The only sound in the room was the faint hiss of static, and the air conditioner clicking every few seconds but never blowing air. The coroner showed up an hour later, said from the looks of it, the man had only been dead maybe 12 to 24 hours. That didn't fit the timeline. The manager had sworn no one had seen him leave or come back in 3 days. The logbook confirmed no entries or visitors, no housekeeping, no food deliveries. The curtains hadn't moved in days, but he hadn't been dead that long. We bagged what evidence we could: wallet, keys, his ID, a few receipts from a gas station 2 towns over. Nothing strange on the surface. The coroner zipped him up and they rolled him out quietly. I took photos of everything. The wall especially, each handprint, each streak. The camera flash caught the greasy sheen. It looked almost wet, even though it wasn't. The smell lingered on my clothes for the rest of the night. I remember driving home with all the windows down, the wind hot and noisy, trying to get it out of my head. The next morning, I went back to the motel to take follow-up photos before the room was cleaned. When I pulled into the lot, the clerk's car was gone. A woman from housekeeping stood outside smoking, and when I asked for the manager, she said he'd packed up at sunrise and left without telling anyone where he was going. Room 9's door was wide open. Inside, everything was spotless. Sheets replaced, floor vacuumed, walls scrubbed clean. Not a single handprint. The TV was off, the air conditioner humming softly. It looked like any other cheap motel room again. The smell was gone. Not masked. Gone like it had never been there. I checked the bathroom, under the bed, even behind the curtains. The trash had been emptied, the food wrappers gone. There was a faint smell of disinfectant and bleach. Nothing else. The manager hadn't reported the death to anyone else, hadn't filed an incident report. It was like he wanted it erased before anyone could ask more questions. I called the coroner's office. They confirmed they had the body, still waiting on toxicology. Cause of death was listed as undetermined pending results. No drugs or alcohol detected so far. For a while I kept thinking about those handprints. The smears, the way they were shaped, like he'd been pressing his whole body against the wall. Not artistic or ritualistic, just chaotic, animal-like. When I looked through my photos later that week, I noticed something that still sticks with me. The handprints weren't just from one person. Some were smaller, thinner, some too wide. The angles didn't all match. A few looked upside down, like from someone crawling. There was never any follow-up. The man's next of kin was contacted. Cremation ordered quietly. The motel changed ownership 2 months later. Room 9 got new paint, new furniture. Nothing left from before. Every now and then, when I pass through that stretch of highway, I glance over at the Lakewood sign, still buzzing faintly. The place is half empty, half forgotten, but I still remember that smell, that wall, and how something about it all never fit right. I stopped by one last time years later out of curiosity. The new clerk said they didn't even have a room 9 anymore. The numbering had been changed after renovations. I asked why, and she shrugged, said the last owner had bad luck with that one. I didn't press it. Sometimes, when the weather gets thick like that night, air heavy and still, sky low with heat, I catch a faint trace of that smell again. Not strong, just enough to remind me. And I think about that man sitting there, eyes open toward the static, the greasy wall behind him and the hands that weren't all his. It was mid-January when the call came in about the missing snowmobiler. His name was Evan Morrison, 34, local to the area. He'd gone out early Saturday morning to check ice fishing lines on Lake Wyndham and never came back. By Sunday night, his wife reported him missing. We got the coordinates from the GPS tracker on his sled. The last ping was right in the middle of the frozen lake. I'd done winter searches before, but Wyndham was different. The lake sat high in the northern range, surrounded by miles of forest and open snowfields. The kind of place that went completely silent after dark. The kind of silence that made you feel like the world had stopped moving. We started early the next morning. The air was sharp enough to sting the inside of your nose, and the snow squeaked under the weight of the sleds. There were 6 of us in total, part of the county's search and rescue unit, along with 2 sheriff's deputies who'd brought an auger and sonar rig. The wind was steady out of the northwest, carrying a fine mist of snow across the ice like smoke. We followed Evan's last GPS point straight onto the lake. The snowmobile tracks were still faintly visible, stretched in a clean line across the surface, leading toward the center. About 400 yards out, the tracks veered slightly, then ended in a rough churn of slush and shattered ice. That's where we saw it. His snowmobile tilted forward into a half-submerged hole, back end sticking out at an angle, front buried in dark, refrozen ice. The scene looked wrong. There was no sign of him nearby. No prints, no drag marks, no sign that he'd crawled out or tried to pull the sled free. Just the machine, frozen in mid-motion like it had stopped in time. We roped off the area and drilled our first hole about 10 feet from the sled. The ice was thinner than we expected, maybe 6 inches in places, which was odd because most of Wyndham was over a foot thick by that time of year. The sonar rig went down next. At first, the screen showed nothing but static and distortion, but then a shape appeared. Human-sized, maybe 6 or 7 feet below the surface, suspended just off the bottom. We assumed it was him. It made sense. We widened the hole and sent a hook line down. It caught something almost immediately. When we started to pull it up, the rope went tight. Heavier than I expected, sluggish, like the water didn't want to give it up. I remember the ice creaking around the edges of the hole as the body broke through the surface. Only it wasn't Evan. It was a woman. Her skin was pale, waxy, but her clothes were almost perfectly intact. An old-style snowsuit, dark blue with a stitched patch on the shoulder from a snowmobile club that hadn't existed for nearly a decade. Her boots were laced tight. Her braid was still neat, frozen strands of hair wrapped like rope against her neck. She looked like she'd gone under yesterday. We hauled her onto the sled tarp and nobody said much for a while. The deputies checked the ID tag on the inside of her jacket, and that's when it hit us. She wasn't just some unknown person. She was Claire Donovan, a woman who'd vanished 10 winters earlier after her snowmobile went through the ice on this same lake. They never found her body back then. They said the current must have carried her under, that she'd been lost to the water. But she looked untouched, as if the ice had kept her preserved in a pocket of time. We flagged the coordinates, called it in, and had her airlifted out by early afternoon. After that, we stayed behind to keep searching. We figured maybe Evan had gone through another section nearby, maybe trying to help her after his sled hit the same weak ice. But we found nothing. No more tracks, no more signs of struggle. Just wind and empty ice. The official search went on for 2 more weeks. They sent divers in when the ice was thick enough to hold gear. But visibility was awful. Muddy water, heavy silt, tangles of weeds near the bottom. When they didn't find him by February, the sheriff called it. Everyone assumed his body would surface come spring, but it didn't. Not until April anyway, after the thaw. A local trapper found him about 10 miles downstream, where the Windham River curved out through the forest. His snowmobile jacket had been swapped for something else. Blue, with a faded patch from that same old snowmobile club. The same jacket the woman had been wearing when we pulled her out. The coroner's report said he'd died of hypothermia. He'd made it out of the water somehow, walked for miles before the cold took him down. His boots were missing, probably lost in the ice or along the riverbank. They found cuts on his hands, frostbite, signs he'd crawled at some point, maybe looking for shelter. The strangest part wasn't the jacket itself, it was how dry it was. After weeks of melt and snow, the fabric wasn't soaked or frozen solid. It was stiff with frost, but the lining was almost clean, like it had only been outside a few days. There were theories. People said he must have found the jacket while trying to stay warm. Maybe the ice cracked open where her body had been trapped, and he came across it before heading downstream. But the timing didn't make sense. We'd already recovered her, sent her body to the county coroner, stored her clothing and evidence. The jacket she was wearing had been logged, sealed, and tagged the day we found her. We checked the serial stitching on both jackets, hers from the evidence locker and his from the body. Identical. Same repair marks on the cuffs, same frayed pocket lining, same faded thread along the zipper seam. There wasn't any rational way to explain that. They ruled both cases as accidental deaths. The official line was that her body had somehow been preserved by the cold and released years later, and that Evan had likely borrowed an identical jacket from another source or had one of his own. But no one in town believed it. I still remember standing out there that first day, the cold pressing through my gloves as we stared down into the hole. The way the sonar flickered before locking onto her shape, the quiet afterward, when the only sound was the wind moving across the lake. It's been years since that search. But every winter when Windham freezes over again, I think about them both, how 2 people separated by a decade somehow crossed paths beneath that ice, how one came back from the water, and the other followed her trail into it. Sometimes I drive by the lake in late January when it's covered in snow. You can't tell where the ice ends and the land begins. Just a wide, blank stretch under the gray sky. And I always slow down, looking out toward the center where his snowmobile went through. There's nothing there now, just a faint depression in the snow where the wind never seems to settle. Like something underneath still remembers. I worked nights at dispatch before I was ever a cop. It was the kind of job that changed the way you looked at silence. When you sit alone in a small room lit by fluorescent bulbs, the hum of equipment becomes a kind of background music. And even the softest sound, a printer waking up, a chair creaking, feels like a shout. I worked the 11 to 7 shift, the dead hours when the town was mostly asleep, and the calls that came in were either emergencies or complete nonsense. You learn to tell the difference fast. That night I remember it was cold, early February, and the kind of cold that froze your breath to the window if you exhaled too close. The building's heater was running unevenly. one of the vents rattling every few minutes. I was halfway through a stale coffee, flipping through the nightly log when the phone rang. The timestamp on the monitor said 3:10 a.m. At first I thought the line was dead, just a faint crackle. Then I heard it, someone whispering. A man's voice, slow and low, almost like he was speaking through a cloth. All he said was, "Room 12. Room 12. Then silence. I waited. Room 12. Again, same tone, same calmness. Like he was reciting something he'd been saying for hours. I asked him to repeat, but the line stayed quiet for about 10 seconds before he whispered it again. No panic. No background noise except what sounded like faint static. Then the line clicked and went dead. I tried to trace it, but the system didn't pull up any listing. No number, no caller ID, just unlisted source. That was unusual, but not impossible. Payphones or old analog motel phones sometimes came through like that, especially ones still wired through copper lines instead of digital systems. I logged the call, marked it as suspicious, and radioed patrol to check local motels. We didn't have many, 3 in total, all small roadside places that mostly hosted truckers or travelers who missed their turnoff. The first unit checked the Pioneer Motel, empty. The second checked the Rest Easy Inn, all dark, all rooms locked. Then one officer, Parker, called in saying he was checking a place just past the highway, an old roadside lodge half hidden by trees. It used to be called the Silver Star. I knew the one. White paint peeling off, old neon sign that hadn't lit up in years. The kind of place people forgot existed until they needed somewhere cheap to sleep. A few minutes later, Parker radioed back. He sounded confused, said everything was dark except for one room, room 12. Light was on, curtain partly drawn. He knocked, no answer. Door locked from the inside. Through the window he could see the phone on the nightstand, the receiver off the hook, dial tone humming through the silence. The manager was called out of bed. He showed up in pajamas, irritated, holding a flashlight. Said room 12 hadn't been rented in weeks. No one had a key but him. He opened the door for Parker. Room was clean but dusty. Bed made, no luggage, no sign of anyone. The phone was indeed off the hook, just the steady tone of an open line. Parker hung it up and looked around. Nothing disturbed. He said it felt like someone had just been there. The air still had that faint, musty smell you get when a room's been closed up too long, mixed with the cold air from the hallway. He closed it up and left. When I logged the final report, it didn't make much sense, but it wasn't the strangest thing we'd ever had. I noted it, saved the audio recording, and finished my shift. I didn't think much more about it until a few days later when I went through the tape. Every call was recorded automatically, even ones that hung up quickly. I scrolled back to the 3:10 mark, put on the headset, and hit play. The voice came through again, soft, broken by static. Room 12. Room 12. Hearing it again made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just whispered. It sounded like the man was trying to stay quiet, like he was hiding. You could hear faint breathing between words. Then I caught something else under it, so faint I almost missed it. Background noise, far off but distinct. It took a moment to realize what it was. Sirens. The same pitch and tone as ours. Local police units. It wasn't from my side because the room where we took calls was completely silent. These were coming from wherever the caller was. It didn't make sense. None of our cars had sirens running at that time. I checked the logs. No active pursuits, no emergency responses, nothing near that area. Yet there they were, faint but real, bleeding through the call. I replayed it several times. The sound came and went, like the caller was outside somewhere, hearing the sirens pass by before the line went dead. I told the supervisor about it, but there wasn't much to do. The motel owner confirmed again no one had checked into that room for weeks. The wiring for their phones ran through an old switchboard that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Maybe it was crossed lines. Maybe interference. Still, it bothered me. I'd worked dispatch for years, and I'd heard plenty of strange calls. Kids playing pranks, confused elderly callers, even butt dials. But nothing like that one. Something about the timing of it, the precision of the whisper. The sirens in the background that shouldn't have been there. It all sat wrong. I started checking reports from that night again, looking for any incidents around 3 a.m. There was one, an old accident report from months before. A single vehicle crash near the Silver Star Lodge. The driver had swerved off the road, right beside the motel, died before units arrived. When I checked the archived dispatch log, the time of the call reporting that crash was 3:10 a.m., same time, same location. It didn't prove anything, of course. Could have been a coincidence. Could have been an old analog phone line picking up leftover signals, or a glitch in the recording system. That's what the tech guy said. But when I played it again one last time before deleting it from the system, I noticed something small I hadn't heard before. Just after the whisper of room 12, before the line clicks dead, you can faintly hear a second sound. Not sirens this time, just a faint metallic tone, steady and short. The same tone that our own dispatch phones make when someone hangs up on their end. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the clock glowing 3:10 a.m. again on another quiet night shift, and thought about how the voice on that call might have come from somewhere that wasn't supposed to have a line anymore. The Silver Star was torn down the next year. They said the wiring inside was so corroded that most of the phones hadn't worked in years. But I still remember that voice, slow and calm, whispering like it knew exactly who it was calling. Room 12, over and over. And every time I pass that stretch of road on night patrol now, I glance over at the empty lot where the motel used to stand. I always half expect to see one light still on,